Hello out there in podcast land. This is Texas Desert Rose, Tammy Terrell here, licensed professional counselor, and we're going to be talking about a pretty interesting topic today, highly sensitive persons. And by the time you get through with this, listening to this recording, I think you'll have a very good sense of whether you fit this or not, or if there's anybody in your life that you know that fits it. And from here on out, we're going to call it HSPs, highly sensitive persons, okay? And we're being joined, I'm honored to be joined by Lori Martin, also licensed professional counselor, someone who also identifies as an HSP. Hello, Lori.
Hey, Tammy.
Thank you for joining us this morning in Texas.
Yes, it's good to talk to you.
So just a little bit about Lori, and of course, Lori, you're welcome to go into it also. Private practice therapist, so not only personally but professionally deals with and works with HSPs. Yes?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I do.
So a few facts about it. I've been doing some research on it. And that HSP is actually a genetic trait, much like the color of your eyes or the shape of your ears or nose. It's not a defect. It's just another trait which affects, they approximate 20% of the population. And I need to get the name of the lady who wrote books on this and discovered this genetic predisposition. I know her name is Elaine, but I need to get her last name to give her full credit on this.
Yeah. It's Dr. It's Dr. Elaine Aaron, and she started researching it in 1991. And it's also referred to as SPS as well as the HSP. So SPS stands for sensory processing sensitivity. Is another term that's sometimes used in regard to it.
And I was reading or listening also that how do we know it's not just shyness or being demure, but it also affects 30% of extroverts. Is that correct?
That is correct. Dr. Aaron did a documentary several years back. In her documentary, she kind of gives an example of two deers kind of running through the woods, and they hit a clearing, and deer A just kind of bolts out and goes out into the meadow and just starts, eating, right? Mm-hmm. Deer B kind of stops at the tree line and observes its surroundings and then slowly navigates out. And it's just a difference in personality. It's like you said, it's not a defect. It's not a disorder. She even identifies it as it is something that is a part of our personality, but it's almost like a different survival skill that we're born with.
So it's actually, instead of seeing it as demure or timid, it's actually an extrasensory ability to assess.
Yeah.
So I was looking at... Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was going to say, it is estimated that 20% of the population falls into the HSP category. I don't know if maybe it's just the the space that I'm in, but I run into a lot of HSPs, so it makes me really wonder if it's more than just 20%. But they also say that it happens in animals too, not just in humans.
It's interesting. That is interesting. They were, I think studying tadpoles or fish or something, but...
Yeah.
I was really surprised at only 20%, but so that the rest of the audience can get on board a little bit, they did an acronym called, which is DOES, and each of those letters stand for, it's when an HPS person goes into processing death, like death of processing, that's the D, where they're way, O is the easily overstimulated.
Yes.
E is the emotionally reactive and empathy. In fact, the saying was used, a Hebrew saying that says, when one cries, the other tastes salt, which is total empathy for how others around you are feeling. But, that in general, HSPs, of which I also identify, are oversensitive to their environmental stimuli. Like they're going to notice in a room if less light would be more comfortable for people.
Yeah.
Is the AC too cold? And my big one is identifying when sound in the room is way too loud. How about you?
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. As an HSP, we tend to be more tuned into things that might be uncomfortable, not just for ourselves, but for other people. And we might even be able to kind of anticipate what another person's needs might be. But yeah, it is, I know for me, I have a strong sense of smell. I'm offended by really bright lights. Like it gives me migraine.
Yeah. So not even just offended, it hurts you.
It's painful. Yeah. And I remember when I watched her documentary for the first time, it was like a light bulb went off in my head. And it was like, because I can think of many, many times as a kid where I really struggled with my surroundings and didn't understand why. And when I saw her documentary, it was like, oh my gosh, yeah, there's a whole thing, and I'm not the only one who experiences this,
Yes.
And I think recently you had posted on Facebook the self-test, the HSP self-test.
Mm-hmm.
I know I still score a 23 out of 27, so I'm a pretty high HSP.
Yes.
But I remember reading through the questions, and I could remember, I could visualize moments where I've really struggled with that, and I can see how it's still, some of those questions are still uncomfortable for me, but I've learned how to adapt to them. And so how I respond to them now is way different than how I responded to them as a child. So
I'm sure.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't necessarily be learning more about it, just more honoring of what you need or don't need.
Absolutely.
So for anybody out there who wants to know if they register, I'm sure you can Google. I couldn't, speak the quiz here because it is copywritten, and I didn't do this in advance to get permission. But you can Google highly sensitive persons or HSP and take your own quiz to see if you fit the bill or not.
Yeah. And the website is hsperson.com, and
Great.
There's a lot of resources and a lot of the different types of questionnaires that you can complete on yourself or for your child.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So some other facts that I picked up on is that not only oversensitive or sometimes, just very tuned in with your environment, but we actually process details on a deeper level. Like there was an example of two pictures, and there was one small detail that was different, and HSPs can pick up on it a lot faster than the average. And so, deep, intense feeling of emotion. They showed pictures of people's partners to them, and they definitely felt more intense reactions. But the cool news that came out of that, some good news out of all this too, and all of it's good news. I think when we get through with the recording, people will hear and see that there's a lot of good stuff that comes from this. But HSPs actually, when presented with things they care about, they actually feel more intense joy or happiness. Not the negativity as much. So I thought that was interesting. And something that has to be, they also, their biggest thing is under arousal because they get very bored. They can feel isolated. So they can't just cut out relationships. They just have to be mindful of the environment in which they, go out or what have you.
For example, an HSP person would not, or an HSP would not want to, if you're going somewhere where there's a large crowd, and you're in the middle of the crowd, that's probably the worst place for you to be.
I agree.
Because you're taking on, everybody responds differently. Every HSP is different, but I know for me personally, if I'm going to somewhere where there's a large crowd of people, I do not want to be in the center because I'm taking on too much energy, too much sensory input. And so I function the best if I stay on the perimeter of the group, because I can regulate how much energy I'm taking in and out.
And separate out when you need to.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's key. It really is about, if we get busy trying to, as HSPs or anybody for that matter, if we get busy trying to protect ourselves from, experiencing these difficulties, what we end up doing is kind of barricading ourselves in. And so it really is about trying to find ways that we can, like you said earlier, honor ourselves and figure out how to care for ourselves in situations so that we can still engage in things that we want to, while also trying to limit things that are overstimulating as well.
Well, and I found it very interesting, too, that many HSPs actually need an assessment or a quiz to let them know that they are an HSP, because we adapt so much we don't even realize it.
Absolutely. If you think about the estimation that 20% of the population is highly sensitive, that means the majority of the population is not. And so, we're for those of us who are HSP, we're living in a environment that is not really fully designed for us,
Correct.
And so we do have to do a lot of adapting.
Well, and they even made the point that even in Western society, the Western countries, UK, US, it's really tough on the HSP children.
Yeah.
So
and they tend to hear things like "don't be so sensitive," or and that's one of the things that the HSP question or questionnaire or that comes up a lot is, were you told as a child frequently that you're too sensitive?
Oh my goodness, I definitely identify with that.
Yeah, I do too. We're taught that it's something wrong with us because the majority of the population doesn't experience the world the way we do. But there are cultures where HSP is responded to differently, which I would be interested in learning more about how it shows up in other cultures. But definitely in the Western culture for sure, we're encouraged because it's not easily identified, especially by non-sensitive people or people who have different level of sensitivity, that we're taught or we're encouraged to feel, intentionally or unintentionally, that there's something wrong with us.
Yeah. I have to adapt my environment because there's something broken about me, and that's absolutely not the case, no more than you would say, hey, I'm green-eyed, therefore there's something wrong with me.
Right, absolutely.
So in general, talking about the workplace environment, I've often wondered, why am I picking up on so many different nuances, and this workplace stress can really get to me. And something else about that really gave me pause and validation was that when HSPs get tired, we're not nice. I mean, I am not nice. I'm not nice. Yeah. So that's my clue that, hey, I better get some rest or try to, take care of me for a little bit before I get into high stress situations when it can be controlled.
Yeah. Well, and you're also identifying additional vulnerability there. So if you think about it, if you're an HSP, and then on top of that, you add any vulnerabilities, then anytime we experience a vulnerability, we're experiencing typically more than one at a time. So even a non-HSP would start to have a reaction, right? So, but if you think about being an HSP and then being tired or hungry or not feeling well or being overstimulated by any kind of sensory input, the more we experience, the more difficulty we might have.